Some men fight battles in boardrooms or battlefields. Mine was fought in janitor closets, with a mop in one hand and my daughter's future in the other. Every morning, I dragged myself into work long before the sun had risen, not because I loved what I did, but because I had no other choice. My body belonged to the endless cycle of cleaning, scrubbing, and sweeping, but my mind was never inside those walls. My mind was always with her, my little girl, my reason for waking up, my reason for swallowing humiliation and rejection, day after day. People saw a janitor when they looked at me, but inside, I carried the weight of a father desperate to give his daughter more than the empty life I had been handed. Being a single parent is like carrying two lives at once. I had to be her father, her mother, her protector, her provider, and her dreamer. The nights were the hardest. After tucking her in under a blanket that wasn't nearly warm enough, I would sit alone at the kitchen table, with bills stacked like mountains, each one shouting louder than the last. I would rub my blistered hands together, stare at the numbers I couldn't possibly pay, and wonder how long before the world decided to strip even the little we had left. There is a special sting in rejection when you are not alone in your suffering. If it were only me, maybe I could endure hunger and cold. But it was her soft face, her trusting smile, her belief that Daddy could fix anything that was what crushed me when I walked out of offices empty-handed. Every resume I handed out came back to me like a boomerang, untouched, unconsidered. Managers glanced at me with quick dismissals. Secretaries smiled politely before sliding my papers into a pile that would never be read. To them, I was just a man who smelled of bleach, who carried calloused hands, whose future had already been written in dirty tiles and empty halls. I told myself I could take it. I had to take it. But inside, each rejection carved pieces off my soul. I would walk home with heavy steps, rehearsing the story I would tell her. It's okay, sweetheart. Daddy just has to wait a little longer. Something better is coming. She would believe me, because children are born with faith, and her faith in me was both my salvation and my prison. It kept me alive, but it also reminded me that I couldn't fail. Not again. Not this time. That morning was no different. I was sitting on a worn-out chair in a waiting hallway, my resume creased from being folded and unfolded too many times. My shirt was ironed as best as I could manage, though the fabric still carried faint stains that never seemed to wash away. My shoes were polished, but they were so old the leather cracked with every step. I rehearsed my lines silently. Words I had memorized to the point of numbness. Hard-working, reliable, willing to do anything. I told myself this time could be different, but deep down, I already expected the familiar silence, the polite dismissal, the same look of pity that stung worse than cruelty. My palms sweated, my heartbeat pounded, but I sat still, holding on to that last thread of hope because if I didn't, then what was the point? And then she walked in. The sound of her laughter filled the hallway before I even saw her. It wasn't cruel at first, it was confident, playful, sharp, the kind of laugh that demanded attention. When I lifted my eyes, I saw her. A woman dressed with elegance, her heels striking the floor like a metronome. Her presence so commanding that the air itself seemed to shift around her. She didn't belong in this building. She looked as though she had stepped out of another world entirely, a world of power, wealth, and authority. Her gaze landed on me, and I froze. It wasn't pity. It wasn't disgust. It was something stranger amusement. Her eyes lingered on my worn shoes, my folded resume, my nervous grip, and then back to my face. I braced myself for mockery, for dismissal, for yet another reminder of my insignificance. But what she said instead struck me harder than any rejection I had ever endured. She tilted her head, her smirk widening, and with laughter dripping from every word, she said, "If you dance this tango, I'll give you a job." Cliffhanger, merged with hook plus title. The hallway went silent, my heartbeat roaring in my ears as her challenge sank in. I had fought every kind of battle to survive, but now, my future, my daughter's survival, and my last shred of dignity all balanced on something as absurd, humiliating, and terrifying as a single dance. Hook. She looked at me and laughed, but her next words cut deeper than I expected. The sound of her laughter echoed in my ears long after the last note faded. It wasn't the kind of laugh that warms a room. It was the kind that slices through silence, leaving behind a sting you can still feel long after. I had been laughed at before. By employers who thought my resume was pathetic. By strangers who thought a janitor was easy to mock. Even by colleagues who assumed I would never rise beyond cleaning floors. But this laugh was different. It wasn't casual cruelty. It was deliberate, sharp, designed to pierce the fragile armor I had built around my dignity. And as much as I wanted to look away, my eyes were glued to her. She carried herself with a presence that belonged to another world. Her heels clicked against the polished floor like a rhythm she controlled, each step measured, confident, powerful. Her suit was tailored perfectly to her frame, the deep black fabric pristine and sharp, accented by a red silk blouse that shimmered faintly under the light. Her hair was sleek, every strand in place, and her eyes were painted with a shade that made them seem larger, colder, more consuming. She wore jewelry, not as decoration, but as symbols of dominance. A glinting watch that looked far too expensive to touch, and earrings that caught the light like sparks. Everything about her screamed control, authority, and power. The kind of power that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. And then there was me sitting there with a crumpled resume in my hand, my shirt ironed but worn thin, my shoes polished but cracked, my shoulders stiff with nerves I couldn't hide. She looked down at me as if she were peering into a display case, analyzing some strange object she wasn't sure was worth buying. I shifted uncomfortably under her gaze, but there was nowhere to hide. Her eyes pinned me to my seat, stripping away whatever scraps of confidence I had managed to bring with me that morning. She tilted her head slightly, her smirk widening, and then she spoke, her voice carrying the same confidence as her walk. "Is this really you?" she asked, glancing at the resume in my hand before lifting her eyes back to mine. "A janitor? That's all you've ever been?" The words hit me harder than I expected. I opened my mouth to answer, to explain, to defend myself, but no words came out. She had already dismissed me with that laugh, already decided what kind of man I was, and my silence only seemed to amuse her more. For a moment, I hated her, not for her wealth, not for her beauty, not for her authority, but for the way she could so easily make me feel small, as if I had no right to sit in that chair, no right to hope for something better. I clenched my fists against my thighs, trying to steady my breathing, telling myself not to break, not to show her how much those words hurt. But she saw it anyway. She leaned in slightly, her voice soft but sharp enough to slice through my chest. "You really think you belong here?" Her words rang inside me, bouncing against every rejection I had ever endured, every door slammed in my face, every time I had been told I wasn't good enough. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to meet her gaze. For once, I wanted to stand firm, to prove that I did belong, that I wasn't just a janitor clinging to scraps of hope. But before I could say anything, she leaned back, her laughter spilling out again, crueler this time, echoing through the empty hallway. And then, as the laughter died, her tone shifted. She looked at me with a sharpness I hadn't seen before, a glint in her eyes that carried something more dangerous than mockery. It carried intent. Her lips curled into a smirk, and she spoke the words that froze me in place. "If you dance this tango, I'll give you a job." At first, I thought I misheard her. My mind replayed the sentence, trying to piece it together, but it sounded no less absurd the second time. A tango? Here? In this hallway where I had come seeking work, desperate to prove myself as more than a janitor, more than a failure? My heart stumbled, my thoughts colliding violently inside my skull. Surely she was joking. Surely this was another layer of her cruel humor, another way to belittle me. But when I looked at her, there was no laughter in her expression now. Only expectation. Shock coursed through me, followed quickly by humiliation. Was this what my life had become? Reduced to performing tricks for a chance at survival? I wanted to shout, to ask her why, to demand an explanation for why a man's ability to provide for his daughter depended on something so ridiculous. But the words stayed locked in my chest, trapped behind the weight of my disbelief. Memories rushed back, uninvited, of being laughed at on playgrounds as a boy, of being mocked for my clothes as a teenager, of being sneered at for being just a janitor as a man. This moment felt like the cruel culmination of every insult I had ever swallowed. She had the power to give me what I needed most: stability, income, a future, and instead of asking for my experience, my skills, or my determination, she asked me to dance. My cheeks burned, not with anger but with shame. I could already imagine the way I looked to her, a desperate man, on the edge of begging, willing to do anything, even something as degrading as dancing for amusement. And yet, deep inside, another voice whispered louder than my pride. What about your daughter? What about the bills stacked at home? What about the food you can't afford, the shoes she needs, the future you promised her? It was then I realized this wasn't just a cruel joke. She was serious. Her eyes, steady and unblinking, told me that this was not a passing remark or a test of humor. This was the condition, my future, my daughter's future. The very roof over our heads, it all rested on whether or not I was willing to dance a tango for a woman who held my dignity in her palm. My heart pounded violently, my hands trembling as I clutched the resume that suddenly meant nothing. The air in the hallway grew heavier, pressing against my chest as I stared at her in disbelief. Her smirk didn't waver, her confidence didn't falter, and that was when the truth sank in like ice water through my veins. She was deadly serious. The thought of dancing in front of her felt like the cruelest test of all. I had endured many forms of humiliation in my life. I had been turned away from jobs before I even opened my mouth, laughed at by supervisors who told me janitors were easily replaceable, ignored by people who walked past me as if I were invisible. I thought I had grown immune to it, that rejection and ridicule had hardened me into something unshakable. But in that moment, as her smirk lingered in the air and her challenge echoed inside my chest, I realized that nothing could have prepared me for this. The idea of dancing in front of her, in front of anyone, filled me with a dread so sharp it stole the air from my lungs. I hadn't danced in years. It wasn't just the physical act that terrified me, but what it represented. Dance belonged to a different version of me, a younger man who still had dreams, who still believed life could be beautiful, who still thought love could last. That man was long gone, buried under bills, exhaustion, and heartbreak. To resurrect him now, in front of a woman who clearly delighted in mocking me, felt like peeling open a scar and inviting her to laugh at the wound. My body stiffened, my palms grew clammy, and my throat tightened with the certainty that if I tried, I would fail miserably, and she would never let me forget it. Memories swarmed me uninvited, sharp and merciless. I remembered being a boy at school, standing on a stage during a talent show, my knees trembling as I attempted a clumsy dance routine I had practiced for weeks. I remembered the sound of laughter spilling from the audience when I missed a step, the sting of classmates whispering jokes at my expense for weeks afterward. Later, as a teenager, I recalled being coaxed into dancing at a party, only to feel eyes burning into me as I tripped, the ridicule spreading through the room like fire. Each time I had tried to show that part of myself, the world had responded not with encouragement, but with cruelty. Those moments had taught me that dance was dangerous, that it exposed too much of me, that it gave people ammunition to tear me down. And now, here I was, a grown man, a father, faced with the same cruel possibility. If I said no, I would lose the opportunity that might put food on the table and a roof over our heads. If I said yes, I risked collapsing under the weight of her laughter, her judgment, her inevitable scorn. Either way, I felt trapped in a corner with no way out. My dignity screamed at me to refuse, to walk away, to tell her that no job was worth this. But my desperation whispered louder, reminding me of the empty refrigerator at home, the bills piling higher, the shoes my daughter had outgrown but still wore because we couldn't afford new ones. I closed my eyes for a moment, and her face appeared my little girl, with her wide, trusting eyes and the smile that never faded even when the world seemed cruel. She believed in me, always. To her, I wasn't just a janitor, I was her hero, her protector, the man who could fix anything. I thought of her laughter when I read her bedtime stories, the way she clung to me when she was afraid, the way she looked at me like I was unbreakable. The truth was, I was already broken, but she didn't need to know that. She needed me to be strong, even when I wasn't. And in that moment, the weight of her trust pressed against me like a force I couldn't ignore. I opened my eyes, and the conflict inside me raged harder than ever. Pride told me this was beneath me, that allowing her to see me stumble would only confirm her low opinion of me. But love told me I couldn't afford to walk away. My pride couldn't fill my daughter's stomach. My pride couldn't pay rent or keep the lights on. I could endure humiliation if it meant she didn't have to endure hunger. And so I sat there, trembling, every muscle in my body tense with fear, trying to summon the courage to do something I had avoided my entire life. I looked at her again. She was still watching me, her smirk daring me to rise, her eyes glinting with the thrill of having cornered me into a choice no man should have to make. Her confidence was suffocating, her elegance a weapon, her laughter a blade. I wanted to hate her for it, and in some ways I did. But more than that, I hated the way my own weakness made her power possible. She wasn't just testing my ability to dance, she was testing the limits of how far I would go to survive. The air grew heavy around me. My heart pounded so violently I thought she might hear it. My hands shook as I placed the resume down, realizing it meant nothing now. My fate wasn't going to be decided by words on paper, but by whether or not I could summon the courage to face ridicule once more. I swallowed hard, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs refused to move. I thought again of my daughter, her laughter, her smile, her faith in me, and I realized that for her, I would endure anything, even this. I inhaled deeply, the air burning my lungs, and forced myself to rise. My knees trembled as though they were made of glass, my body unsteady, my pride bleeding out of me with every second. I stood not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. Every step I took forward was fueled not by courage, but by necessity, by desperation, by the image of my daughter's hungry eyes. I was terrified, humiliated, and ashamed, but I knew that if I didn't try, I would never forgive myself. And so, with my body trembling and my heart pounding like a war drum, I rose from my chair, my eyes fixed on hers, and whispered silently to myself that this was for her, only for her. Then, before I could change my mind, I stood up, trembling, ready to try. When the music started, I thought my legs would collapse. The sound filled the room with an almost mocking richness, the kind of melody that demanded grace and confidence, two things I had lost years ago. The tango was not a kind dance, not forgiving, not simple. It was bold, sharp, seductive, and precise, everything I was not in that moment. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat louder than the music itself, my body betraying me with tremors that ran from my chest down to my toes. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to take one step forward, but even that felt like trying to walk on ice. The polished floor gleamed under the dim lights, each reflection a reminder of how exposed I was, how nothing about me could be hidden here. My shoes scraped awkwardly against the surface, my body stiff, my movements jagged and unnatural. I was painfully aware of her eyes on me, watching, calculating, amused. I didn't even need to look to know she was smirking, that her lips were curled in that infuriating shape that told me she was certain of my failure before I had even begun. And then, it came the sound I feared most. Laughter. It was faint at first, maybe from someone who had drifted close enough to witness the absurdity of what was happening, but it cut through me like a blade. It wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. My ears caught it. My chest clenched, and in an instant I was no longer standing on that polished floor. I was back in every moment of shame I had ever endured. I remembered the school talent show, the missed step, the eruption of giggles from the audience that left me frozen on stage. I remembered the party as a teenager, my foot sliding out of rhythm, the roar of laughter echoing from the walls while I stood red-faced, wishing the ground would swallow me whole. Now, as an adult, here it was again, ridicule, circling me like vultures, my feet tangled with each other, my hands stiff at my sides, my body refusing to listen to the music. Each awkward shuffle only made me more aware of how ridiculous I looked. The rhythm was there, pulsing steadily through the air, but my steps landed out of sync, clumsy and uneven. I could almost feel her amusement radiating from across the room, her smirk growing sharper with each mistake, her confidence swelling as she watched me prove her point. To her, this was entertainment, nothing more. I clenched my jaw, willing myself not to stop, not to walk away, though every nerve in my body screamed at me to sit down and surrender. My pride burned, but deeper than pride, desperation clawed at me. This wasn't just about dignity anymore, it was about survival. If I walked away, I lost the chance. If I endured, even as a fool, I might gain something more valuable than self-respect, the ability to provide for my daughter. And so I stumbled onward, my body rigid, my steps heavy, my embarrassment painted across my face for her to enjoy. But then something strange happened. Between the cracks of my fear, beneath the sting of humiliation, the music reached me in a way I hadn't expected. The rhythm, sharp and deliberate, tugged at a part of me I had long forgotten. My chest rose and fell with the beat. My feet, though still clumsy, began to echo fragments of patterns I hadn't thought about in years. It came not from practice, not from confidence, but from memory. Somewhere deep inside me, buried beneath years of exhaustion and defeat, there was a boy who once believed in movement, in rhythm, in the beauty of dance. I remembered flashes of a younger me, sneaking into small community halls where tango music spilled from speakers, watching older couples glide across the floor with passion in their eyes. I remembered mimicking those movements in secret, clumsy but eager, feeling alive in a way no other act had ever made me feel. And though life had dragged me far away from those nights, the rhythm had stayed lodged somewhere in my bones. I took another step, this time slower, and though it wasn't perfect, it wasn't entirely wrong either. The music pressed against me, urging me forward, pulling at the pieces of me I thought were dead. My breathing steadied, though my heart still raced, and for the first time since she had issued her cruel challenge, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, I could do more than stumble. Her smirk was still there, her eyes still glittering with amusement, but for the briefest moment, I caught something else flicker across her face. It was subtle, gone in an instant, but it was enough to fuel me. Maybe surprise, maybe curiosity, maybe the faint recognition that this wasn't going quite the way she expected. My shame was still thick, my embarrassment still raw, but it had shifted into something else now, defiance. If she wanted to laugh at me, then let her laugh, but I would not stop, not this time, not when my daughter's future depended on me standing tall instead of crumbling. The music swelled, louder, richer, wrapping itself around me until the room seemed to fade at the edges. My steps were far from graceful, but they were steadier now, less frantic, less broken. I lifted my head, forcing my shoulders to loosen, my body to bend slightly with the rhythm instead of resisting it. The echoes of laughter still stung, but the beat pressed harder, calling out to something in me that had been silent for far too long. And then it happened. My body shifted, almost on its own, slipping into a familiar motion I hadn't felt in years. The weight of my foot landed not where my panic told it to, but where the rhythm guided it. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with recognition. My body remembered moves I thought I had forgotten. One by one, my steps transformed into something I didn't know I still had. At first, I thought the steadiness in my feet was a trick, a momentary accident born of desperation. But then, the rhythm of the tango, sharp, pulsing, demanding, began to seep into me, filling my chest and commanding my limbs in a way no words could. My panic didn't vanish entirely, but it dulled, replaced by something far more dangerous, Memory. My body was remembering what my mind had forgotten. Movements etched so deeply into me that time, hardship, and humiliation had failed to erase them. The clumsy shuffling began to melt away, step by step, replaced with a flow that surprised even me. My knees loosened, my back straightened, my hands once stiff at my sides lifted naturally, as if seeking a partner who wasn't there. I began to bend with the rhythm instead of resisting it, allowing the sharp strikes of the music to guide me instead of fight me. For the first time in years, I was not thinking about how ridiculous I looked or about the eyes on me. I was inside the music, and the music was inside me. I dared a glance toward her, expecting the same mocking smirk, the same glint of ridicule. But instead, I saw something I hadn't anticipated, a flicker of surprise. Her eyes widened just slightly, her head tilting, her lips parting as though the words she had prepared no longer fit the scene before her. It wasn't approval, not yet, but it wasn't amusement either. She hadn't expected this, and the realization fueled me like oxygen to a dying flame. My mind drifted backward, carried on the tide of rhythm, into a time when dance wasn't humiliation but freedom. I remembered sneaking into the back of community centers as a teenager, watching couples sway across wooden floors, their bodies speaking in a language I longed to learn. I remembered mimicking their steps at home, clumsy but determined, feeling alive each time I discovered a new motion that felt right. There had been nights when music filled me so completely that I forgot about everything else. The chaos of my home, the loneliness of my heart, the uncertainty of my future. Dance had been my escape, my rebellion, my secret joy. But life has a way of burying joy under responsibility. When I became a father, when her mother left, when bills piled up and survival swallowed everything else, dance became a luxury I could no longer afford. I abandoned it, telling myself it didn't matter, that it was foolish, that it was part of a boy I had no right to be anymore. Yet here it was, rising from the ashes inside me, uninvited, undeniable, unstoppable. The laughter that had once cut into me had faded, now, replaced by silence. The people who had chuckled at my clumsy start were watching with something else in their eyes. Even she, the woman who had smirked with such certainty, was no longer laughing. Her body leaned forward slightly, her expression tightening, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle she hadn't realized existed. I could feel her gaze like heat against my skin, but instead of shrinking beneath it, I rose taller. My steps sharpened. My turns grew more deliberate. I bent with the music, slid with its rhythm, struck with its force. Fear was still there, coiled in my stomach, but it no longer controlled me. Instead, it drove me, reminding me of why I was here, why I couldn't stop. This wasn't just a dance. This was a declaration. Every movement said what my mouth never could. I am more than the man you think I am. I am more than the janitor, more than the broken father, more than the desperate figure begging for scraps of opportunity. I am still alive. The air itself seemed to shift. The polished floor reflected not my shame, but my defiance. The music filled the space with a fire that demanded I rise higher, and I obeyed. I could feel my chest burning, not from exhaustion, but from emotion. I wasn't just dancing for her approval. I wasn't even just dancing for survival. I was dancing for my daughter, for the little girl who deserved to see her father as something more than a man crushed by the world. Each step was a promise to her, a vow that I would not quit, that I would fight for her future even if it meant stripping myself bare in front of strangers. I saw her shift again, her smirk faltering, her eyes narrowing with something closer to disbelief. She had wanted a spectacle, a fool stumbling across the floor for her entertainment. What she got instead was a man refusing to break, a man who carried a forgotten passion inside him like a hidden flame. Her amusement cracked, her lips pressing into a thin line as if she refused to let herself react. But I saw it, the silence, the stillness, the way her gaze locked tighter, unable to look away. The more I moved, the stronger I became. It was as though every memory of my past flowed into my limbs. Every humiliation I had endured transformed into fuel. My body ached, but the pain only sharpened the rhythm. My mind screamed that this was madness, but my heart silenced it, reminding me that this madness was survival. And then, in the middle of it all, a realization struck me so hard, it nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. For the first time in years, I felt the rush of life surge through me, unfiltered, raw, and real. Dance had not abandoned me. It had waited. It had stayed in my bones, in my muscles, in the quiet parts of my soul that refused to die, waiting for the moment I needed it most. And that moment was now. The music soared to its peak, the room still and breathless, and with it, I lifted my chin, letting my body move with the kind of fluidity that no amount of practice could manufacture. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it was true. It was me. And as I stepped, spun, and struck the floor with renewed force, I felt the eyes on me, not as knives, but as witnesses. This was no longer her test. This was mine. And as the final note hung in the air, I saw her smirk vanish, her smile fading into stunned silence. Suddenly, it wasn't just a job interview, it was a stage. The walls around me blurred as if the building itself had dissolved into something unreal, something vast and uncontainable. What had begun as a humiliating test now felt like a performance, as though the air had thickened with expectation, as though invisible curtains had risen around me. I could no longer hear the scrape of shoes in the hallway or the faint hum of conversations beyond the door. All of it had melted away, leaving only the music sharp, pulsing, merciless, and the rhythm it carved into the silence. My feet struck the floor with newfound certainty, no longer hesitant, no longer clumsy. Each step echoed with meaning, sharp when the music demanded power, smooth when it called for grace. My arms moved with an instinct I had buried for years, sweeping upward, extending outward, carving shapes into the air that matched the fierce lines of the tango. My back straightened, my chin lifted, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt not like a beggar or a broken man, but like someone commanding space, commanding attention, commanding respect. The lights seemed to shift, though I knew they hadn't. Shadows stretched and recoiled across the polished floor, giving the illusion of a spotlight following me. The air grew heavy with silence, thick with anticipation, as if the very room was holding its breath. I could feel eyes on me now, not just hers, but others who had drifted closer, curious about the spectacle unfolding in what should have been nothing more than a mundane building. Secretaries peered around corners. A guard leaned subtly against the wall. Even a passerby paused outside the glass door, all drawn in, all silenced by something they hadn't expected to see. I didn't care about them. I didn't care about anyone anymore, not even her. For the first time, I was dancing not to prove myself, not to survive, not even to silence her laughter. I was dancing because it felt like breathing again. The fear had burned away, consumed by the heat of passion rising from a place I had thought was long dead. Every beat of the music was a heartbeat of my own. Every turn, a defiance of the years that had ground me down. Every movement a reclamation of the man I had lost. Her smirk was gone. I knew it without even needing to look at her. The air no longer carried the sting of mockery, but the weight of awe. When I finally risked a glance in her direction, her lips were parted, her posture leaned forward, her eyes wide, not with amusement, but with disbelief. She had expected to break me, to strip me bare in front of an audience, to watch me crumble beneath ridicule. Instead, she was watching something neither of us had expected me rising, not as a janitor begging for scraps, but as a man who carried power in every step. The tango was relentless, demanding more with every note, but I gave it everything I had. My shoes struck harder, my turns grew sharper, my arms cut through the air with fire. I wasn't perfect, not in the way a trained dancer might be, but perfection didn't matter. What mattered was truth, and in that moment, my movements were drenched in it. Pain, loss, desperation, and love all poured out of me in the language of the dance. Each strike of my heel against the floor was a memory of rejection, each twist of my body a scream against despair, each step forward a vow to my daughter that I would not fail her. The silence of the room grew heavier, broken only by the music and the sound of my breath. I could feel sweat sliding down my temples, soaking into the collar of my shirt. But even exhaustion felt like fuel. My body burned, but I embraced the fire, letting it drive me further, higher, faster. The rhythm was no longer something outside of me, it was inside me, commanding my veins, steering my bones, forcing me to remember that I was more than survival. I was alive. I saw her again, and this time, I truly looked. Her smirk was gone, entirely, replaced by something I had never imagined I would see in her. Her eyes sharp, cold, mocking before now held a flicker of something softer, something vulnerable. Awe, yes, but also confusion. She was a woman who had built her life on control, on dominance, on never being surprised. And yet, here she was, leaning forward with parted lips, as though she had forgotten to breathe. For the first time since I met her, I wasn't the one on display. She was. Her mask had cracked, and in the space behind it, I saw humanity. Around us, the world had stilled. The faint laughter that had haunted my first steps was gone, replaced by silence so deep it rang in my ears. No one dared interrupt. The janitor, the single father, the desperate man they might have pitied or mocked, had disappeared. In his place was something they couldn't label, something they didn't know how to process. The music surged into its final rise, and with it, I threw everything left in me into the dance. My arms lifted high, my feet struck the floor with thunder, my body spun with a precision that even I hadn't known I still possessed. The air crackled around me, filled with the raw force of desperation transformed into beauty. The heartbeat, it felt as if time itself had stopped, as if the walls and the lights and the shadows had vanished, leaving only me and the rhythm. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the music ended. The silence that followed was deafening. My chest heaved, my shirt clung to me with sweat, and my entire body trembled from the force of what I had poured out. But no one laughed. No one moved. Even she, the woman who had dared me into this, sat frozen, her lips slightly parted, her eyes locked on me with a look I could only describe as stunned disbelief. The smirk was gone, the laughter extinguished, replaced by a silence that felt louder than any applause. The weight of the moment pressed against me. I stood there, breathing hard, waiting for someone to break the spell, to laugh, to clap, to say something that would remind me this was still reality. But the silence stretched on, thick and unbroken, until finally, it was her voice that pierced it. Her lips curved, not into a smirk, not into laughter, but into something else entirely, and then she whispered words that sent a shock racing through my veins. Then, in the silence between beats, she whispered something shocking. She wasn't just anyone, and I wasn't just a janitor anymore. For a long moment, the silence between us felt like it could stretch forever. My chest rose and fell with the effort of catching my breath, sweat dripping into the collar of my shirt, my muscles trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. But she was no longer the woman who had smirked and mocked and challenged me like a puppet on a string. The laughter that once defined her presence was gone, replaced by something I had never expected to see. Vulnerability. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, carried not the sharpness of cruelty, but the weight of recognition, as though what she had just witnessed had reached somewhere far beyond this room. She leaned back slightly, her lips parting, then closing again as if words were struggling to form. For the first time, I realized she wasn't untouchable. The air of control that had wrapped around her like armor had cracks now, and through them, something raw flickered, something deeply personal. The way she looked at me wasn't just shock. It was familiarity, like my movements had awakened a part of her past she thought was buried. Her hand rose slowly to her mouth, her fingers brushing against her lips as her gaze lingered on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than before, stripped of its mocking edge. "That," she whispered, "wasn't luck. That was real." The word struck me harder than her laughter ever had. Real. It had been years since anyone had used that word to describe anything about me. To most, I was invisible, replaceable, forgettable. And yet, here she was, admitting that what I had just done had been undeniable. My throat tightened, my hands still shaking as I struggled to understand why this mattered so much to her. Then she stepped forward. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, but this time they carried no arrogance, no power play. Instead, they sounded hesitant, cautious, almost reverent. She closed the distance between us slowly, her eyes never leaving mine, and when she spoke again, her words carried a weight that stunned me. "Do you know," she began softly, "that tango was the language of my childhood?" I stared at her, trying to piece her meaning together, my mind racing. She continued before I could speak. "My parents. They met in a dance hall, long before I was born. My father was a performer, my mother a student. Tango wasn't just music to them, it was life. It was love. It was the rhythm that carried them through every hardship. When I was a girl, they filled our home with it. I grew up falling asleep to the sound of records spinning, to the sound of their footsteps across the floor. That was how they spoke to each other, how they stayed together, how they raised me." Her voice trembled slightly, though she tried to mask it. But life isn't kind to passion. My father died young, and with him, the music disappeared. My mother never danced again. She told me tango was a ghost that haunted her, a reminder of everything she lost. And so I buried it too. I built walls. I told myself that love, art, passion, they were distractions. I chose control instead. Power, distance, and I never looked back. Her words fell like stones into the silence, heavy and unshakable. My heart pounded, not just from the effort of dancing, but from the realization that what had just happened was far bigger than me. This wasn't just about humiliating a janitor desperate for work. This wasn't just a cruel test. It was something deeply personal to her, something tied to wounds she had never let anyone see. She shook her head slightly, as though she couldn't quite believe it herself. "But when you danced," she said, her eyes narrowing with intensity, "I saw him, my father. The way you held yourself, the way you moved with the music instead of against it, it wasn't perfect, but it was true. And truth is rarer than perfection." Her words sliced into me, not as cruelty, but as something far more dangerous. Honesty. I felt exposed, raw, as though she had looked past my sweat, my trembling body, my desperation, and seen something I hadn't shown anyone in years. A part of me wanted to look away, to retreat back into the safety of invisibility, but another part, the part that had awakened with the music, refused. The air between us shifted. No longer was I the janitor, and she the woman with the power. We were something else now, two people standing at the crossroads of memory and survival, bound together by a rhythm older than either of us. I wasn't just a man begging for a job anymore, and she wasn't just a woman mocking me for sport. We were linked by something we hadn't chosen, but couldn't deny. Her eyes glistened faintly as though the weight of her past was pressing against her composure. She drew closer still, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the force of a revelation. "This wasn't random. Do you understand? I didn't ask you to dance to humiliate you. I asked because I needed to know if you had something real left inside you. Something beyond work, beyond desperation, something that could break through walls." Her confession struck me like lightning. All the humiliation, all the fear, all the doubt, it had been a test, yes, but not the kind I thought. She hadn't wanted to see me fail. She had wanted to see if there was more to me than what I claimed, more than what my resume could ever capture. And in proving it to her, I had somehow proved it to myself, too. I swallowed hard. My voice caught somewhere between disbelief and exhaustion. "I don't know what I have left," I admitted quietly. "But I know that when I danced, it felt like I was alive again." She closed her eyes briefly, inhaling as though my words had struck something inside her, and when she opened them again, her gaze locked onto me with a sharpness that was no longer cruel but searching. For the first time, I realized that this wasn't about her mocking me or me proving her wrong. This was about two broken lives, brushing against each other through the language of tango. And then, she stepped closer, the distance between us narrowing until I could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her painted lips trembled just slightly. Her voice was soft but firm, her words carrying a weight that would haunt me long after. She stepped closer and said, "Where did you learn to dance like that?" Her question pulled me back to a version of myself I thought was gone forever. Her words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting, and I felt them crack something open inside me. Where did you learn to dance like that? It wasn't just a question, it was a demand from fate itself, forcing me to confront memories I had spent years burying under exhaustion, responsibility, and shame. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room, the music, even her piercing eyes all faded, and I was no longer standing in that building as a janitor begging for a chance. I was somewhere else. Someone else, the boy I used to be before the world crushed him. I saw myself again at 16, barefoot on a wooden floor in a community center where the walls smelled faintly of varnish and dust. My shoes were too worn for proper dancing, but I didn't care. The old stereo crackled with tango records borrowed from a neighbor, and the music filled the hall like a promise. I moved clumsily at first, mimicking the couples I had watched for hours, trying to copy the sharp angles, the elegant turns, the silent language between partners. My body failed me again and again, but something deeper kept pushing me. Every stumble was followed by a stubborn attempt, every mistake by a refusal to quit. Because even then, I knew when I danced, I felt alive in a way nothing else had ever given me. By 18, it wasn't just stubbornness anymore. I was good. Not perfect, not professional, but good enough to compete in small local events, good enough to catch the attention of instructors who told me I had something rare, not just technique, but fire. They said my steps carried emotion, that my movements had weight. I remember standing on a dim stage once, my heart pounding as lights blinded my vision, and hearing the crowd applaud as I finished a routine with a passion I didn't even know I had inside me. For one fleeting moment, I believed the world might open up to me, that maybe my life could be more than scraping by. I dreamed then, bigger than I had ever dared before. I dreamed of travel, of stages in cities I had only read about, of making a name not as a worker cleaning up after others, but as a man who carved beauty into the floor with every step. Tango wasn't just a hobby for me. It was a destiny I wanted to chase. It was the way my heart spoke when words weren't enough. But life does not wait for dreamers. Life strikes hard, without mercy. My father fell ill during those years, and with him went the stability of our family. Hospital visits, bills, and endless nights of worry chipped away at me until the fire of dance was forced to burn smaller and smaller. I still competed when I could, but each time I returned home, the weight of responsibility grew heavier. Then, when my father died, the fire dimmed further. My mother was left shattered, unable to work, unable to carry us. Suddenly, the dreams of a young dancer didn't matter anymore, survival did. I worked wherever I could. First odd jobs, then night shifts, then the janitorial work that consumed my days and nights. Dance was still there, but only in fragments, a step or two in the quiet of an empty room, a rhythm hummed under. My breath as I scrubbed floors. Slowly, inevitably, it slipped further away until I convinced myself it had never truly belonged to me. And then came fatherhood. I hadn't expected it. Not so soon. Not in the chaos of barely holding myself together. Her mother left before our daughter could even walk, leaving me with nothing but a child in my arms and a heart full of terror. Overnight, dreams stopped being a choice. They became luxuries I could no longer afford. Every coin, every ounce of strength, every second of my life went into raising her. I told myself that was enough, that I didn't need stages or music or applause. That being a father was purpose enough. And in many ways, it was. My daughter became my anchor. The reason I kept moving even when exhaustion threatened to break me. But I would be lying if I said there weren't nights when, after she had fallen asleep, I sat in the dark and remembered the boy I had been. The boy who once believed his feet could tell stories. The boy who once thought the world might listen. That boy had been buried under responsibility, under fear, under the brutal demands of survival. Now, standing in front of her, this woman, whose eyes still burned with a past tied to tango, I realized how far I had drifted. I had convinced myself I was only a janitor, a man with nothing left to offer but labor and sweat. And yet, when the music played, when desperation forced me to move, that forgotten boy had clawed his way back into the light. It terrified me, because if I had once loved dance, if I had once lived for it, then what did it mean that it was standing in front of me again now, after so many years? What did it mean that fate had dragged me, of all people, back onto this stage I had long abandoned? My heart ached as I remembered the heartbreak of giving it up the last time I stood in a dance hall, staring at my reflection in a cracked mirror, knowing it would be my final practice. I had pressed my palms against the glass, whispering a goodbye to the boy who had dared to dream, telling him he was gone now, replaced by a man who had no choice but to survive. I had walked away that night, convinced I would never return. And yet, here I was, standing before a woman who had just pulled it all back out of me with one cruel challenge. I looked at her, my throat tight, my words heavy with the weight of memory. "I used to dance," I whispered, though the word used felt like a betrayal of everything inside me. "A long time ago. Before life. Before everything else." My voice cracked, and I had to force myself to keep speaking. I thought it was gone. I thought I was done with it. But tonight? I don't know. It felt like it never left. Her eyes softened, the sharp edges of her authority fading into something I could only describe as empathy. She didn't speak right away, and in that silence, I felt the enormity of what had just happened settle over me. I had not only remembered who I once was, I had shown it to her, to everyone watching. I had exposed a part of myself I thought was buried forever. The truth was undeniable now. Dance had been my dream once. It had been my escape, my salvation, my purpose. And though I had sacrificed it for survival, though I had convinced myself I no longer needed it, fate had dragged it back to me with a force I couldn't ignore. And now, as her eyes stayed locked on mine, one question echoed louder than the music, louder than the silence, louder than my fear. Fate had brought dance back to me, but why? When she finally told me why she tested me, I could hardly believe it. For a long moment, she didn't speak. The silence between us thickened, so heavy it felt like it might crush me where I stood. My chest was still heaving from the dance, sweat cooling against my skin, my mind spinning with questions I couldn't form into words. She had asked me where I learned to dance like that, but the truth wasn't what mattered anymore. What mattered was why she had asked me to dance in the first place. Why had she chosen that test, something so humiliating, so strange, so unlike any job interview I had ever known? She took a breath, her lips parting slightly as if the words weighed more than she could carry. When they finally came, they struck me with the force of a confession she had been holding for years. "I needed to know," she said quietly, "if you were more than what you looked like on paper. If you were more than what life had made you." Her eyes didn't carry mockery now. They carried pain, sharp, unhealed pain that flickered beneath the mask of confidence she wore like armor. She stepped closer, her voice low but firm, as if she was speaking not just to me but to some ghost that haunted her. "Anyone can mop a floor, anyone can punch a clock, but I needed to see if you still had something inside you. Discipline, yes, but also spirit. Creativity, fire, something you couldn't fake even if you tried. That's why I chose the dance." I stared at her, my mind refusing to accept it. The absurdity of it all burned inside me. I had nearly broken myself with fear, with humiliation, believing she was toying with me for her own amusement, and now she stood there telling me it had been a test for something deeper, a test not of my skills, but of my soul. Her gaze softened as she continued, her words unraveling secrets I had never expected to hear. "The truth is, I've been looking for someone who hasn't given up, someone who still fights even when the world tries to grind them down. Do you know how rare that is? Her voice trembled just slightly, betraying a crack in the steel she wrapped around herself. Most people break and never stand up again. You stood. You danced. You proved you were still alive. Her eyes flickered away for a moment, as though she couldn't bear my stare. When she spoke again, her tone shifted softer, sadder, and maybe it wasn't just about you. Maybe it was about me, too. Those words landed heavier than anything else. My heart thudded hard against my ribs, and I waited, breathless, as she revealed what I hadn't seen before. When I laughed at you earlier, she said, her voice raw, it wasn't cruelty. It was fear. It was the only way I knew to hide how much I missed this. She gestured faintly toward the space where I had just danced, her hands trembling as though even admitting it was difficult. Tango was my father's gift to me, his legacy. But after he died, I swore I would never let it touch me again. I buried it under ambition, under work, under control. But when I saw you stumble, when I heard the music, it dragged me back. And when you began to dance, I couldn't laugh anymore, because it was like watching a part of myself I'd forgotten. The realization shook me. Her laughter, her challenge, her smirk, it hadn't been cruelty at all. It had been armor, a way to protect herself from her own past. She hadn't mocked me because she wanted to see me suffer. She had mocked me because she was terrified of seeing the reflection of what she had lost. I swallowed hard, my throat tight, as her words sank deeper into me. So this was never just about a job, I said slowly, my voice trembling as the truth began to form. Her eyes snapped back to mine, and for the first time, I saw them glisten. She stepped closer, her voice lowering into a whisper that carried both pain and power. This was never about a job, she whispered. The job was never the prize, it was something greater. Her words echoed inside me, breaking apart the fragile assumptions I had clung to. I had walked into this room begging for janitorial work, desperate enough to accept humiliation in exchange for a paycheck. And now she stood before me, telling me none of it had been about that at all. The mop, the bucket, the hours I imagined scrubbing, floors under flickering lights, none of it mattered. My chest tightened as she took another step closer, her voice steady but trembling beneath its surface. You think I tested you to see if you could clean a floor? She asked, her eyes locked on mine. No. I tested you because I needed to know if you could rise, even when everything told you to fall. I needed to know if there was something left inside you that couldn't be broken. Her words burned through me like fire, stripping me bare. I had spent so long defining myself by survival, by the bare minimum, by the endless grind of making it through one more day. And now she was speaking of something bigger, something I hadn't allowed myself to even imagine in years. She inhaled slowly, as if weighing the enormity of what she was about to say. Then, her voice dropped into a whisper. This isn't about janitorial work. It's about something greater. I want to give you a chance to dance again. Not just here, not just tonight, but truly, fully, a chance to return to the stage. The words struck me so hard I staggered. I blinked, certain I had misheard. A laugh escaped me, not out of amusement but disbelief. Dance? I whispered hoarsely. You think I could go back to that? My voice cracked under the weight of the question. I looked down at my trembling hands, the calloused skin from years of labor, the exhaustion that never left my bones. I'm just a janitor now, a single father who barely knows how to keep going. I'm not that boy anymore. But she didn't flinch. Her eyes sharpened with a determination that startled me. No, she said firmly. You're not that boy anymore. You're more. You've lived. You've suffered. You've endured. And that makes your dance more powerful than it ever was before. You don't just move with rhythm now. You move with life. Her words pierced me, but instead of lifting me, they tangled me deeper in my doubts. Could I really do this? Was I worthy of stepping back into a dream I had abandoned, of claiming a stage that I had long ago convinced myself I wasn't good enough for? My mind rebelled, flooding with memories of failure, of laughter, of nights where hunger drowned out hope. I shook my head slowly, the weight of disbelief pressing down on me. "I just wanted work," I said, my voice breaking. "A paycheck. Something to keep the lights on, to feed my daughter. That's all I need. Not stages, not spotlights, just survival." But even as the words left me, they tasted like lies, because deep inside, something pulsed stronger, louder. A truth I had buried beneath years of struggle rose up, demanding to be heard. I wanted more, not just for me, but for her, for my daughter, who deserved to see her father as more than a man who bowed to survival. Her face softened as though she had read the battle inside me. "I know you're scared," she said quietly. "But think about her. Think about what it would mean for her to see you rise again. To see her father not just survive, but live. Don't you want her to know that dreams don't have to die just because life gets hard?" My throat tightened, my vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall. Images of my daughter filled my mind, her small hands clutching mine as we walked to school, her laughter echoing in the empty apartment, her eyes wide with trust that I sometimes felt I didn't deserve. She had never seen me as weak, never called me broken, never judged me for what the world had taken from me. To her, I was still everything. But what if I could show her more? What if I could give her not just survival, but inspiration? The thought hit me with a force that left me trembling. This wasn't just about me. This was about her future. If I accepted only survival, she would learn to accept only survival. But if I chose more, if I dared to step onto a path I had abandoned, maybe she would learn to believe in her own dreams too. My chest heaved as I turned back to the woman before me. "And if I fail?" I asked softly, the words almost breaking. "What if I take this chance and fall harder than before? What if I can't do it?" Her eyes held mine, unflinching. "Then you'll fail fighting for something greater, and that will still be more than surrendering to nothing." The silence that followed stretched heavy between us, but in that silence, I felt something shift. My doubts didn't vanish, my fear didn't dissolve, but beneath them, a seed of determination began to grow. She wasn't offering me janitorial work. She was offering me a life I thought I had lost. And now, the decision lay squarely on my shoulders. She stepped back slightly, giving me space, her expression unreadable but her eyes burning with challenge. Then, her voice rang clear, sharp, undeniable. "So what's it going to be? Will you take the chance?" Every decision I had ever made had broken me, but this one could save us. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the silence of my small apartment, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the rhythm of my daughter's breathing in the next room. My body ached from the dance, my muscles sore, my lungs still raw, but none of it compared to the heaviness in my chest. Her words replayed over and over in my head, each repetition striking me harder than the last. This was never about a job. Will you take the chance? I thought about all the decisions that had brought me here, the wrong ones, the desperate ones, the ones I had been forced into when life had offered me no choice at all. Each decision seemed to have carved another scar into me, stripping away pieces of who I was until I became the man I saw in the mirror now. Tired, broken, invisible. Every rejection, every failure, every humiliation had etched itself into me until I no longer believed I was capable of choosing anything greater than survival. My mind drifted back to the endless rejections I had faced, the way interviewers glanced at my resume and dismissed me with polite smiles, the way managers looked at me as though I was already beneath them, the way people's eyes slid past me on the streets, as if poverty were contagious, as if my very existence was an offense. I had begged for chances, only to be told I wasn't enough. And now, suddenly, a chance had been offered not just survival, but redemption. Yet I was paralyzed by fear. I turned on my side, curling into myself, my fists tight against my chest. Doubt gnawed at me, like a beast I couldn't kill. What if she's wrong? What if I can't do it? What if this isn't salvation, but another cruel game? I had been mocked before, humiliated before, and the thought of failing again, this time in front of my daughter, nearly crushed me. But then, as though summoned by the weight of my fear, Her face appeared in my mind. My daughter, with her wide, innocent eyes, her small hands clutching mine, her laughter that somehow managed to survive the poverty around us. She had never asked for much, never complained about the empty fridge or the nights I came home too tired to smile. She believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, and in that belief, I saw something I had been blind to all along. She deserved more than a father who settled for scraps. She deserved a father who dared to fight for something greater. The realization struck me like lightning. Survival wasn't enough. Not anymore. I had convinced myself for years that enduring was victory, that getting through each day was all I could hope for. But enduring wasn't living. Enduring wasn't teaching her strength, or courage, or hope. If I wanted her to believe in her own dreams, then I had to show her what it meant to chase mine. I sat up in bed, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. My heart pounded, as if it already knew what my mouth would have to say. Fear still clawed at me, whispering that I would fail, that I wasn't enough, that I would embarrass myself again. But another voice, quieter, steadier, fiercer, rose to answer it. Even if you fail, at least you will have tried. And so, when the morning came and I stood before her again, my body still trembling, my throat still raw, I finally found the courage to speak the words that had nearly broken me to hold. Yes, I said, my voice shaking but firm. I'll take the chance. Her expression didn't change at first. She simply studied me, her eyes sharp and unreadable, as though searching for cracks in my resolve. I held her gaze, refusing to look away, forcing myself to stand tall even though my knees threatened to buckle beneath me. For once, I didn't let fear control me. I didn't let doubt silence me. I had made my decision. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, a smile curved across her lips. Not the mocking smirk I had grown to hate, not the cruel grin of someone watching another's downfall, but a smile filled with something deeper. Approval. Maybe even respect. You've made the right choice, she said softly. Relief washed through me like a tidal wave, but it was short-lived, because as she reached into her bag and pulled out something small and folded, my heart lurched violently in my chest. Her eyes stayed locked on mine as she extended it toward me, her voice dropping into a whisper that carried more weight than anything she had said before. But what she handed me next left me breathless. I came for a job, but I left with a future. My hands trembled as I reached for the envelope. It looked so ordinary, no different from the hundreds of envelopes I had received over the years. Bills I couldn't pay, rejection letters, notices that reminded me of how far I had fallen. But this one felt different before I even opened it. Her eyes told me so. They followed me with an intensity that burned, as if she already knew what this envelope would mean to me. I slipped a finger beneath the flap and tore it open, the sound of paper ripping echoing like thunder in the silent room. My heart pounded as I unfolded the sheets inside, scanning the lines of text with eyes that blurred from disbelief. It wasn't a rejection. It wasn't janitorial work. It wasn't survival. It was a contract. A contract offering not only employment, but training, sponsorship, and partnership in something I had never thought I would see again. Dance. My name was written clearly at the top, not as a formality, but as an affirmation. The words declared that I was no longer just a man begging for work. I was someone chosen, someone recognized, someone being offered a future. I stared at the pages, my vision swimming as tears welled in my eyes. My voice cracked as I whispered, This can't be real." But she only smiled, her lips curving with the faintest trace of triumph, though her eyes softened with something closer to compassion. "It's real," she said firmly. "You wanted a job, but what you showed me was more than a worker. What you showed me was a man who still has something alive inside him. That is worth more than scrubbing floors." I sank into the nearest chair, the papers shaking in my grip. My entire body felt weightless and heavy at the same time, as though the ground beneath me had vanished. For so long, my life had been about survival, about scraping by, about stretching pennies, about telling my daughter we would be okay when I wasn't sure if it was true. And now, in my hands, was proof that I could be more. When I finally left that building, the contract pressed tightly against my chest. The world looked different. The streets I had walked 1,000 times no longer felt like cages but corridors leading me toward something brighter. Even the cold wind against my face seemed softer, like a reminder that I was alive, that change was possible. That night, when I got home, my daughter was sitting at the small table where she often did her homework, her hair falling across her face as she scribbled in her notebook. She looked up the moment I entered, her eyes wide with the same question she always asked without words. "Did we make it? Are we okay?" I knelt beside her, my hands trembling as I placed the envelope on the table. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "we're more than okay." She tilted her head, confused, then reached for the papers with her small hands. As she read slowly, carefully, her lips moving with each word, her eyes grew wide. When she finally looked back at me, her face glowed with something I hadn't seen in far too long. Pride. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're going to dance again?" The tears I had been holding back spilled freely down my cheeks. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tight as if I could anchor myself to her warmth. "Yes," I whispered into her hair. "I'm going to dance again. And this time, it's not just for me. It's for us." Her laughter rang out, light and pure, and in that moment, I realized how heavy the silence in our home had been until then. She hugged me tighter, her small arms clinging to me with a fierceness that broke and healed me all at once. In her eyes, I wasn't a failure anymore. I wasn't just a tired man working himself to the bone to keep her fed. I was someone who had fought back, someone who had chosen hope, someone who had been given the chance to rise. The days that followed were like stepping into another world. Meetings, introductions, rehearsals, all of it felt surreal. My muscles, long dormant, ached as I began to train again, but with every ache came a spark of life I thought I had lost. My daughter would sit in the corner sometimes, watching me with wide eyes, her smile growing every time I managed a step I thought I had forgotten. And when I stumbled, when doubt crept back in, she was the one who clapped the loudest, who reminded me that failure was not the end but part of the process. Slowly, I began to transform. The janitor's slouch straightened into the dancer's posture. The tired shuffle of a man beaten down by life became the confident stride of someone rediscovering his worth. And though the world outside hadn't changed, the streets were still cold. The struggles still real inside me. Everything was different. I was no longer invisible. The woman who had tested me remained a constant presence, but she wasn't the figure of mockery anymore. Instead, she became a guide, sometimes harsh, sometimes demanding, but always pushing me to become more than I thought I could be. I began to see her not as the stranger who had once laughed at my desperation, but as someone who had recognized a flame I had forgotten I carried. And though I would never fully understand why she chose me, I knew that I could no longer deny the gift she had given, the gift of a second chance. One evening, after a long rehearsal, I found myself standing before a mirror, sweat dripping down my face, my chest rising and falling with exhaustion. For a moment, I didn't recognize the man staring back at me. His shoulders were strong, his eyes alive, his stance unbroken. He wasn't the man who had walked into that room begging for janitorial work. He wasn't the man who had spent years convinced that dreams had no place in his life. He was something new, and I knew then, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning, because the tango wasn't just steps on a floor. It wasn't just rhythm and movement. It was survival turned into beauty. It was pain turned into power. It was the story of my life told in motion, and now, it was the path forward not just for me, but for my daughter. As I tucked her into bed that night, she smiled sleepily and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Daddy." Those words pierced deeper than anything else. They were worth more than contracts, more than stages, more than applause. They were the proof that I had finally given her what she deserved: hope. I kissed her forehead and whispered back, "I'm doing this for you." Then I stepped into the other room, the contract still safe on the table, and allowed myself a rare moment of stillness. I thought back to the beginning, to the humiliation, the fear, the way she had laughed when she first made her offer. And I realized how far I had come. She laughed when she said it, but that single tango gave me back my life. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have danced the tango or walked away? Your voice matters here. And if you believe in second chances and the power of hope, like this video and subscribe so you never miss the next story waiting for you.